Hey, welcome everyone. Normally we'd have an intro, but for whatever reason, I guess StreamYard made it where you need to have like a paid subscription. And since they jacked up the prices, yeah, not doing that. But have you been, Graham?
Oh, not too bad.
Yeah,
Still,
okay.
just stumbling through.
Uh, isn't that just life? I mean, ideally not, but yeah, I've had a pretty uneventful summer, not gonna lie. I've just been hanging out, and uh, yeah, I felt like it was time to stream again, especially because I've just got like way too much time on my hands. But yeah, why don't you get us started off talking about what inspired you to get this presentation together?
Well, this is something that I've been working on for a bunch of times. It's a as people who have followed my writing over the years and presentations, I've been working on an alternative narrative of what actually happened in this world. History is one version, and that's a kind of a very specific way that they derive at that one. And as we're going to discuss here, I throw in some different techniques in order to arrive at some alternative points. And with this one, it was very much based off of a lot of the more recent research from Jonathan Adler and Gad Barnia and Russell Gamerkin, especially. The three of them very much opened my eyes and had me say, I have to rework this timeline because the one that I'm working with is clearly doesn't fit the facts well. Tag.
Interesting, interesting. You want to share the presentation?
Yeah, let me see if I can figure out how to do a share screen here.
It's the plus button, or like it has a computer screen and then a plus.
Mm, okay, it does.
Yeah, it's like on the bottom by the mute and video button.
Well, I see the mute, I see the video, I see the chat, and then I
Oh,
see
hmm.
Yeah, no, I see comments and settings. No, I don't see a share screen.
Let's see. Let's see. Um, Weird. Let's see. Presenter invite. One moment. Let's see settings, guests. I'm not sure. So like you see the mute button, you see the video button. What's to the right of that?
The chat button it pulls up the studio chat with comments, and then I have the three dots for more, and the only more it has is comments and settings, and doesn't have anything under settings, and then it has my exit button.
Bizarre. Let me see. Is there? Can you just share the presentation and then you can tell me when to go through?
Do what now?
Like, is the presentation on like Google or something?
Yeah, it's a Google Slides.
Yeah. So if you share it to me, then I could go through it and we don't have to worry about figuring this out.
Okay, let me.
But yeah, I personally think it's a fascinating hypothesis. I mean, it's not my area of expertise, so like I'll comment on what I can, but I definitely think that there's definitely some truth to it. I just don't know how much.
I was going to say I don't. You're not on my share list. How do I add you?
Uh, you should be able to just uh here I'll in the private chat I'll send my email and then you can share it to there. All right, you see it?
Yeah. Okay.
right, just let me know when you. I got the link. Now I just need to open it up on my. One moment. Okay, let's see. Check accounts here. Gmail. Okay, got the link. Opening it and sharing screen. Alright, here we go. Let's see, how do I zoom in?
You hit play at that point. Start slideshow.
Ah, alright.
There you go.
So, yeah, just tell me when to go, next in.
Yeah, that's just my title slide, which obviously needs some centering work. But go to the next. A lot of this is it's a lot of the history and such that I have up there. I was going to say you can get that slide is, and I'm just gonna talk over it. People who are interested in more of the details can more into that one because I hate presentations when the person just reads off their slides. So you know, I figure we can talk about it. And part of what I'm doing is what I've come to term hypothetical history, where the objective facts are fixed. The stelae, the papyri, the documents, they are what they are. What varies is what the explanation that people use to explain there. And it's sort of like a trying to, recreate the past of what actually happened from those fragments of objective evidence there. And it's trying to basically retroject what happened because, like, from a historical, from a rigorous historical standard, we can't say that people like Julius Caesar, they ate more than maybe about 50 meals in their entire life. So are we expected to believe that they didn't eat more meals than that? And that's where when somebody tries to invoke a certain amount of super hard, we don't have the documentation or things like that, they lose the forest for the trees, in my opinion.
Oh,
And
you mean kind of like when people try to claim that just because Lucian wrote about it, even though it wasn't, even though it was satire, trying to claim that there's as much evidence for Lucian going to the moon as there was for, I don't know, like say something that happened in the Bible, just because they're both written down, but like, obviously if something's not meant to be taken seriously and then you have something that's attested, again, not all the Bibles like that, but you have something that's attested in multiple places, like obviously you should believe something based on its context, but then also off of the frequency that it appears, not just as a claim, but as a record.
exactly. And is it recorded, especially from the alternate viewpoint? It's like when you have, like with the Battle of Kadesh, you have an Egyptian version of events and a Hittite version of events, and go figure, they both claim that they won.
It's kind of like I forget which. It's not that uncommon for wars. It's like where you go to war for one reason and then you end up, like you don't achieve your goal, but then you're like, okay, we won the war, and then the other people manage to like push out invaders or whatever, and they're like, we won the war, and everybody's convinced they won the war.
Well, that was the Nixon secret plan for Vietnam: declare victory and bring the troops home. Don't care what happens to Vietnam afterwards. Yeah. So no, it's like I try to bring some additional approaches that the standard history doesn't, that I learned in some of my STEM, like systems theory and things like things that where you start out with you block off periods of time and you say what you started with at this point, what you ended with, and whatever happened in the middle turned your starting points into your end points, and you kind of chip away from there until you end up with whatever's left. So we can go to the next slide then.
Yeah, I was going to say it almost reminds me of like how with generative AI, like LLMs, you can basically take two pictures and have it go from one to the other, like where, um, like it basically shows you a sequence that takes one picture to the next, where it's not just like going to one picture to the next. It actually has a transition from it, and it's essentially filling in the blanks, the possibility. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a morphing function where where one picture it has its algorithm how it changes the color or changes the shape or such. Yeah. So yeah, the first step, and this is a lot of the problems when you try to extend Judaism back before the Hellenistic period, and it's what I call the elephantine in the room, and that's the temple in Elephantine in Egypt. And you had that had been an established Jewish community, basically Yahwist community for a lot of years, and they had the temples there, and it was basically a military outpost. And they did sacrificial offerings, and they were writing in in a Semitic Hebrew like language at the time, and but they didn't show any understanding of Moses. They don't mention Moses at all. They don't show any recognition for practicing the Passover celebration. They have a temple and they ask you about rebuilding it, and they don't show any indication about how the temple had been rebuilt in Jerusalem. It's like they're not living in the same world that's being described in the Bible, and they're living through the time period where they should have been interacting with some of those characters that were being written there.
Like which characters?
Oh, I want to say that's in during the Persian period. So you're talking, you know, I
Like
forget who.
Ezra and Nehemiah?
Quite possibly, I forget who the big characters were post, post exile. Because you got that 200-year period from the post exile prior to Alexander.
Interesting. Okay, so yeah, let's or anyway, you were saying.
And it was like it was that the research on that one is what started my eyes opening, and it's like it's tough to maintain the basically the standard traditional narrative when the facts just don't support it. So go next.
Uh one thing that I thought was kind of interesting, the mention of sacrifice of ibexes and gazelles. I don't know, that just kind of sticks out because those are images you typically see um, with uh, oh no, never mind. Especially in the context of imagery associated with Asherah, but this was associated with a knot, right?
Yeah, yeah, I believe Anat was who they worshipped at Elephantine.
It also makes sense that it was a military colony because Anat was the goddess of war.
Right. And one of the ideas that I've been exploring recently is since I did this presentation, wrote this up, is the idea about the Yahwism practiced in the in the Persian Empire being connected to Yao, the Egyptian moon god, who just doesn't seem to have almost any mythological stories and kind of vanishes right about the time of the 18th dynasty.
Interesting. He just
Yeah, to be replaced by Khonshu and very much Thoth as the moon gods at that point.
Another thing that I've heard is that apparently some renderings of the ball cycle, when talking about Yam, actually at first render the name Yah. not Yam.
Interesting. The
And
other way, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and there's also a deep connection between the waters, like the oceans and the moon.
Right, and what's interesting with the idea of Yao, the Egyptian moon god, is a lot of the traditional association with Yahweh and Allah with Sin, the Assyrian moon god.
Oh yeah, like I one theory I've heard that kind of connects it is trying to say that there's a connection between the god Sin and Sinai, like
Yeah,
Sinai.
right. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of vague of various not a solid connection, but various threads of connection.
Yeah. All right. So next slide.
Yeah. And this goes into the idea that at that point in time, they really find that there were pretty much four temples that were in use for these sorts of Canaanite religions. You had the Jerusalem temple, you had the Elephantine temple. This is besides that one. You also had the Mount Gerizim in Samaria. There's debate that there was a one in Edom as well, which is the Nabateans, who would come into play later. And then you had also one about in Egypt with Leontopolis.
What about the temple at the temple at Elephantine?
Oh, I said that one first. This was,
Oh,
these were additional ones beyond that.
I see
And
what you
it's
mean.
and it's the idea that the religion that during the pre-Alexandrian pre-Hellenistic time period, it wasn't the monolithic based out of Jerusalem that is portrayed to be later. Go on to the next slide.
All right.
And how this came into play is there's always been these strong questions and parallels about Plato's philosophy and the writings of Moses, and people have sat there and wondered back and forth as to which one came on there. And this is one of my ways of recognizing it is Plato in the Republic and in many of his other writings. He had the idea of creating a synthetic religion for the people to follow in order to keep them in line. It's known to be false. The leaders know it's false, but you sell it to the people, and it basically has them live the proper sorts of life that they need to. And he lists certain things. You need to have a mythical origin story. You need to have your build in your justification for your social hierarchy. You need to promote your civic virtue. The government has to have a divine sanction, and it has to be controlled by the rulers. And this was how Plato. This was basically, in his Republic, and this is his view of the how government and religions need to be run in order to control society. Basically, people need to be put into Plato's cave for their own good. Okay, go on to the next one. Unless you
Yeah,
have something to say, yeah.
I was going to say it kind of reminds me of. Have you ever read the book or seen the series Silo?
No,
So basically, like the world's been destroyed, and they're basically trying to forget the past in order to like be able to have all the things that like destroyed society before be like so forgotten that like they can't be brought back. And it kind of made me think of this. It's like, especially with the whole idea that the world was created, like 5,700 or whatever years ago. Like that idea, essentially trying to. I mean, if you think about it, what it does perceptually is it erases history before, you know, like it basically erased prehistory, if that makes any sense.
oh, absolutely. And if you look at the past, that's another part of my looking at it, is you notice that that happens at various points in time to various societies, where you have those sorts of societal resets happen. The Mycenaean Greece got reset into classical Greece that way, where you ended up with a dark age and you went, a couple hundred years with nobody writing anything down. And then you first started getting writing again about in the 700s with Homer and Hesiod and a few writers. And, you had Socrates, his death is basically 400 BC, that's one of my reference dates. So, you had 250 years from Homer and Hesiod to Socrates' death, and then another, 70 years to Alexander's death. And then you were into the Hellenistic age. And right about 750 BC, that was also about the time you had the fall, all the uprising and the fall of the Assyrian Empire and all that uprising with the creation of money in Lydia. And so much of the writing became much more prevalent at that point in time. So, anything you want to say there, or we can go on to the next one.
Yeah, next slide.
And of course, Plato tagged over to Aristotle, and he put his own spin on Plato's political thoughts, where he emphasized much more of a real world, real politique sort of thing. You need to, be much more empirical, naturalistic. You need to fit it to the environment. And Aristotle was a Macedonian, and he was the son of the court physician for Philip II, who was the father of Alexander, which is why we go to the next slide. We end up with Aristotle was the tutor to Alexander during his formative years. And that's where Alexander got his idea of the centralized authority, the education and culture, the whole idea of the philosopher king. It's a lot of Plato's philosophy filtered through Aristotle, and very much Alexander was the one who then put it into action and practice across and created the Hellenistic world with their ideas.
So I know you have a pretty unique take on Solomon, but do you think that this might have something to do with the filtering of how Solomon was perceived as this wise philosopher king?
I was going to say, I think Solomon was being offered as starting out as that ideal philosopher king. I mean, you can't look at Solomon but see him also as a cautionary tale, where he was given, the wisdom by God, and then pretty much squandered it and ended up with, watching it turn to ashes at the end of his life.
I mean, look at Alexander's empire.
Oh, that wasn't necessarily him, though. It was that we'll go into that one. He pretty much he had plans on what he was going to do. He wasn't done yet.
Yeah, but isn't that one of the things in Ecclesiastes? I might be paraphrasing. This might not even be a biblical phrase, but man plans and God laughs.
I don't know if that's biblical, but yeah, that's definitely true.
But no, the whole point is because there definitely is something in the Bible where it's like a man like a man may make his devices like try to do things, but that ultimately that he's not in control of any of it, and that the foolishness isn't necessarily like that the foolishness of Solomon wasn't necessarily like the same type of foolishness as like you'd see as like the opposite of wisdom, so much as it is the wisdom that was gained from his foolishness. I don't know if that makes sense.
Kind of, because I almost actually spin that sort of concept the other way, where a lot of his foolishness was based off of his wisdom. he had the wisdom, and that ended up giving him a sense of pride and a heightened sense of, you know, that it was coming from him, not God. It's the idea of making your plans is fine. It's if whether or not your plans are, you know, basically sync up with God's plans, fine. If they do, your plans are going to work out great. If they don't, if they're not in sync with God's plans, so much the worse for yours.
Do I go to the next slide?
Yep.
Oh wait, one second. There.
And he Alexander also he incorporates a lot of the Aristotle, where he the idea of a mixed constitution, where it's the he wants to institute an empire only on a Greek level, because the Greeks didn't have the idea of a centralized overarching authority. They were very good with their leagues, but the leagues were, pretty much just associations that fell apart when their mutual self interest no longer aligned, and they
Kind of,
were gone different.
kind of like the Phoenicians, if you think about it.
Oh yeah, very much so. It's a as long as the interests align, that's great. If they don't align, well, so much the worse for you. And one of the things Alexander very much did is he was not into the rape and pillage conquering style. If the city he sat up there and said, "Will you submit to me?" And if they submitted, he didn't rape, he didn't conquer, he didn't sack the city. They just turned over and they started paying their tribute to Alexander rather than, the Persians, whoever they were paying before. Which a lot of times his men didn't particularly like that, because a lot of soldiers based everything off of rape and pillage back in that day. Next slide. Yeah, this is some of those where a lot of what Alexander was doing is he also very much led from the front, and he used non-linear thinking as exhibited in the whole Gordian knot approach, where instead of it, to unravel the knot, he just sliced it. And he used that in quite a few sorts of different things, different ways in his various battles. Like with Tyr, where Tyr was the island, and he decided to conquer it by making it not an island. And he just had his men dismantle the city on the shore and build a causeway.
That's
And go ahead.
definitely. I was just going to say that's definitely a tactic.
Yeah, I'd like the one where the one Bactrian tribe had kidnapped his horse Bucephalus. So his response was he was ordering his men to clear cut the entire country of trees. He was going to basically desolate their land, and they had the people bring the horse back and offer themselves up as just to have Alexander not clear cut the country.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
Now he had a close relationship with the horse.
Isn't wait, you said didn't didn't he end up like honoring that horse a certain way? I forget how.
Oh no, he named a city after the horse in India after the horse died.
Interesting. What's the city called now?
I don't even know off the top of my head.
I wonder if it got Indianized, like the
More than
name.
likely. I mean, just about everything does when it gets, It's like coming over to America. Every name gets Americanized. The wonders of Ellis Island.
Yeah, it's like the wonders of Alexandria, the wonders of Alexan Island. Anyway, You were
Yeah,
saying?
the last one is a lot of what happened with Alexander. Is he built a cult of personality around himself, where he became just a larger than life figure to everyone. Go on to the next slide.
Larger than life, so you're telling me he was a Nephilim?
Oh, I'm sure there are people who say that. You know, again, you have those all the birth myths around him about how his
Oh,
mother Olympia had her womb sealed into snakes, and they have another one how he was actually the son of
Mama.
the missing pharaoh Nectanabo, all sorts of bizarre stuff.
Yeah, you also have the story of him being the child of like Amun Zeus.
Yeah,
Anyway,
and for him, hey, whatever gets him more power and gets the people to follow him better, it's all good. He knew enough real politics.
just look at the state of the world today.
And following up Alexander were, the Ptolemies took over Egypt. And my reading of history in this one is pretty much Ptolemy was behind the death of Alexander with the Nabateans, because that was going to be Alexander's next move, was to take over Arabia and consolidate the land between Arabia and Egypt. And that was something that the Nabateans just could not allow to have happen. And Alexander was probably going to pull it off. He'd done everything else so far. He had the fleet half constructed. He was going to be going to war the next year. So, and Ptolemy was very much an opportunist. He was not originally part of Alexander's close inner circle. He moved in there as Alexander lost people through attrition, and it was only during the war in Bactria in India that Ptolemy really came into the inner ranks. And part of what you have here is Ptolemy was very much in line with Alexander's plan of syncretization and a cultural uniformity across the land. That's where you had the Serapis cult, which was very much a combination of different ones, and the whole idea of a syncretic, basically a synthesized syncretic Semitic religion along the lines of what Plato had in mind in the Republic and such would be exactly what would be, that Alexander and Ptolemy would find very useful, considering all the issues that people had with the Assyrians and other Semitic empires over the years.
So, like, I don't know if you'll address this later, but what criteria or like how do you think that Judaism fits this model of like Plato's ideal religion?
Well, what I look at is there's once I came up with the idea that Judaism is basically kind of like a synthesized syncretic Semitic religion, and you look at the various Semitic empires and countries over the millennia there, and how in the Middle East there and Mesopotamia, it was recycling itself. You were on the third iteration by the time you got to Alexander. I mean, you had went from the Akkadians, and then they fell, and then then you had the Assyrians, you had the Phoenicians, with again the various different ones, Yamhad, and the various other ones in there. You had the Hyksos in Egypt, but it was almost like they were playing a round robin, where you went from the Akkadians
How are
to
you gonna how are you going to forget Ugarit? How are you going to do them dirty like that?
Ugarit wasn't an empire, though. They were basically a duty-free zone. They were the Las Vegas of their day.
Are you seriously going to tell me that Las Vegas isn't its own empire?
It's not an empire in a political sense. It's more of an empire in a
Cultural.
moral, economic sense.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm talking about because like Ugarit, I might be wrong, but I think they had a lot of gold, and that's also like basically the thanks to Ugarit, that's why we have what we know about Canaanite religion for the most part.
Yeah, it's like Ugarit, they were Canaanite, but not Phoenician. It's like they weren't part of the Phoenician club for some reason.
I mean, at the end of the day, like I guess it also yeah because so here's the interesting thing is that like the term Phoenicia, that's actually something that gets applied way later by the Greeks. Like no Phoenicians would have self-identified as Phoenician. The closest thing might have been like Kinanu or Kinani, basically Canaanite. But with shoot, what was I saying? Um, oh yeah, one of the theories I've heard is that Phoenicia was essentially a combination of the Egyptian term for the region that we call Lebanon, which they called Fenku, which referred to like the lumber, and so that they combined Fenku with Phoenike, which meant purple in Greek, and basically turned that into the region which the purple and the wood came from, and combined that syncretically to become Phoenicia. And then that something similar happened with Israel and Palestine, where they took and like this is part of the reason why. I mean, I don't know if Hadrian would have known about this or not, but basically that like the term was it the term like Palestina, that it's a combination of the was it oh my god, what's the word? The ethnonym Palashtu or Peleshet, Philistine, a combination of that with the Greek translation of the Hebrew meaning of Israel, which means like the one who wrestles with God, and basically translating Isra or Yasar into Pale, which means to wrestle or to struggle in Greek, or maybe not struggle, but to wrestle. And like you also see that root within palestra, which is like a gym, a gymnasium, I think, or not gymnasium, but like a place for. I'm I'm so rusty on Greek, but it's an interesting thought because I wonder what other regions you might have that type of syncretism even in the name.
Oh, I was going to say, I couldn't even guess there. One of the other ones that I heard is the possibility that they were redheads, the idea of redheaded sailors, which is a recurring theme across the globe as well.
Wait, the who was?
The Phoenicians, the
Oh,
red was coming from red hair.
what do you mean the red was coming from red hair?
For the phonics, the red in the name was coming from them being redheads and having red hair.
No, but Phoenike means purple, not red.
I thought it also meant red.
I think what it might be is just that because the dye there is, I might be wrong, but let me see. What was it? Uh,
I thought it
who?
was I always thought it was red was the more natural translation and purple was more of the stretch, but it was also becoming the more common one because of the people and the dye.
Okay, so in Mycenaean Greek, the main word for red is phonikoro, later phonikos, a loan word referring to the Phoenicians who furnished the red dye. Um, So I mean, what it could be is because so like you have the purple dye that was produced from the um,
The snails,
yeah,
and that also turns blue in the sunlight. So yeah,
yeah, and then the red was from the Kermes beetle
right.
that they would crush, and that they would harvest them from I think oak trees. I might be wrong. It's a specific type of tree, but I don't
I don't
remember.
know if it was oak tree. Doesn't sound right. It sounds like a much more exotic. I thought it was a more exotic tree, but
No, no, I think you're right. I'm really rusty.
and I'm
Oh,
sure they had a good dye for yellow as well.
hmm.
Dyes are dyes and perfumes and spices. Those are your very valuable trade stuff, and that was part of the whole the whole Phoenician and the whole Nabatean thing. Is they were the traders.
Yeah, it really it's really fascinating just how much history is like kind of under discussed. You know what I mean? Just because they like, and see that's the thing. It's not that they weren't some great empire. It's not that they didn't have influence. It literally just comes to the fact that the way that history tends to be written is from a very like Western centric point of view. And it's only really now that there's kind of more of a focus on other parts of the world. But I feel like the downside to that, not that there's a downside to like starting other parts of the world, but it's almost like I feel like the Middle East almost gets glanced over because people are like, "Oh yeah, we learned about the cradle of civilization," or like they'll know some basic stuff, but it's almost like there's the like that the Middle East or the ancient Near East is in the periphery of both the West and the East. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah,
It's like it's usually understood within um I don't know, maybe not so much from the East. I feel like it's more so just that it gets overshadowed by the study of non-Western cultures, while you have Western cultures completely overshadowing basically where the Middle East. It's almost like the Near East is treated as the place where our modern religions came from, and that's almost like seen as it. I don't know if you get that as well.
I don't get it quite that strongly. To me, an aspect of it that stands out a little more strongly than what you were emphasizing is this idea of the written record. And if the people didn't have writing, or if it wasn't written down and we don't have it written down, historians have to be silent about it. And it's like, yeah, to me, I don't understand where they get that restriction from. It's like, people lived. It's like trying to say that if you have coins from, you know, 5 years, you don't have any coins from 1 year, and then you have coins from another 3 years from one emperor. Are you going to say that he wasn't emperor in that in between year? That in between year didn't exist? It's like, I said that earlier about the how many meals can we say some of these ancient peoples ever ate in their lifetime from a factual historical basis? Almost none. And it's like they want to spin their narratives, but they don't want to, have it tied down to a lot of, you know, real world sort of requirements and sensibilities. All it needs to be based off of is what's written down there. And they don't necessarily have to verify that what was written was true. They just kind of assume if it was written, it was true. Tag.
Yeah, dang it, there is a thought that's I don't remember. Something about the historical record. Oh yeah, that I don't know. I lost the thought. Uh,
Well, it's like on some of these, it's like part of when I was going over there and I realized I had to do the revision. And when you see that, well, we don't have any reference to Moses, and I'm jumping ahead in the presentation, but there's no real references for Moses until the Hellenistic times. And that means you didn't have, 500, 500 BC, during the Persian era, no references to Moses. You know, there wouldn't be any references to Moses. It's one of those trying to wrap my head around this, and then you have to realize, well, they were the Moses. He's a literary character, and there may be some historical figures that they wove together into the literary character, but you have to look at if it's written in a book as a literary character. And once I had to that one, then I had to try to fit, what actually more about from the history to the literary figure sort of thing, if that makes sense. Tag.
I see. So almost like an archetypal figure rather than someone who's supposed to be understood at. Let it's almost like because it just gets um, like it because of how much people took it to heart, it became seen as literal when it wasn't necessarily the original purpose. Or is that what you mean?
That's part of it. It's a, I guess my way of explaining it is like if you look at it from like Babylon. And one of my ideas is one of the reasons we can't find, where Akkad was is because Akkad and Babylon were actually the same city renamed, sort of like Bombay and Mumbai. Whereas just, all of a sudden they started referring it to a different name later on, but it's really the same city. So if you look at it, you had the Akkadian Empire, rise under Sargon and fall, and then it got taken over, and you had a bunch of other ones, and then it rose again with Hammurabi, several hundred years later, and then that Babylonian Empire fell, then came back again with Nebuchadnezzar, and you have this pattern. In Assyria, you had the first old Assyrian Empire, the middle Assyrian, the new Assyrian, and it was like they were all like taking turns, and they all followed the same patterns of, you know, you'd get a reasonable one to get started, and then you'd end up with a bunch of overreach and collapse. And that's very much what they were capturing, during the Hellenistic era as basically the generic result of what happens to a Semitic empire when it takes over things. Starts out good, doesn't follow the gods, overreaches, disaster happens. Am I making sense at all?
Yeah,
What they do is they take different Semitic figures and weave them all in together into sort of a generic one, sort of like how West Side Story and Romeo and Juliet are really like the same story set into different centuries and continents.
should I go to the next slide?
Yeah, yeah. After the fall of after Alexander fell and the you started with the War of the Diadoche, is you had Pyrrhus of Epirus. He's the fellow who gave us the name the Pyrrhic victory, where he would always win battles, but he'd lose them at such a cost to equipment and men. His statement was, I fear if I win one more battle, I will be undone. And he was very much like an Alexander for hire, where different people set him up with armies. He battled over in Sicily, which at the time was between the Greeks and the Carthaginians at the time. That was before the Romans were involved with Sicily, and it was right before the Punic Wars were starting. And he was very, very good friends with the Ptolemies. Spent time in the Ptolemy court in Egypt. And he was an important figure in the political games in between. Go ahead, next slide. Ptolemy II was he was the one that Pyrrhus spent the most amount of time with, and he was the one who ended up putting together the library and much of the rest of Alexandria. and pretty much put into, his father, Ptolemy I Soter, he did it as far as, getting Alexander's body, consolidating Egypt. And then Ptolemy II was the one who started that one. And part of and I have here listed the various different timelines here. And how he and Pyrrhus worked together in order to maneuver and advance their mutual and respective political agendas across the Mediterranean. Next slide. Yeah, here we get to go along with a lot more of it. It's very much it was the Pyrrhus was the Alexander to Ptolemy II's version like his father. Where Ptolemy was the one who was the more of the he was not the action guy. Pyrrhus is the action guy, the political leader, the charismatic one, and Ptolemy was more of the strategist, the builder, putting it together. Next slide.
Oh, that's cute. Look what someone shared. They said Jews have rejected the Messiah since the beginning, yet here they are doing the same crap. Thumbs down for this deception. What is this guy on?
I was going to say the Jews, they had a Messiah before Jesus with Cyrus. You know,
I mean, if you want to get technical with it, every priest and king was also a Messiah.
yeah, but I kind of like to use Cyrus since he wasn't even Jewish.
There's people who like they'll say that he somehow was like. I mean, given it doesn't really make sense, but they'll try to say that like his mom was Esther or something. And this is why historical literacy is very important.
Well, I was going to say Cyrus's parentage and that whole situation. That's a subject for another presentation.
So you're telling me it could be true?
Um, his parents were an arranged marriage. It was his mother was the daughter of the Lydian king, who was married to the previous. I want to say it was King of Anshan. It was an arranged. It was an arranged marriage that was part of the peace treaty that from the Battle of the Eclipse. You know what I'm talking about?
Battle of the Eclipse? Vaguely.
Yeah, that was between the Medians and the. I want to say I think it was the Medians and the Lydians, and there was an eclipse, and both sides decided it was an ill omen, and they decided to call off the battle and the war, and then they formed a peace treaty there, and part of that peace treaty was that the daughter of the one king was going to marry the son of the other, and Cyrus was the what was the son of that couple.
Yeah, that's definitely one way to quash the beef.
It's Cyrus again. All of those birth myths are interesting, where it resembles Oedipus, where he was going to kill his father, and set out, given supposed to be exposed and killed, but didn't happen. All sorts of fun, forcing the guy to eat his own child later on as a consequence. Oh, yeah. Good ancient fun sort of story.
I wouldn't call that fun.
different times. That was before the internet. They had to do something for entertainment, I suppose.
Yeah, I hope that I never understand why people did such strange things.
Yeah, the only thing I keep telling myself is they had nothing else better to do.
But that's not true. There's always something better to do. I fully believe that. Like, no, I mean, like, if you think about it, though, like, people could always say, like, oh, this is so terrible, or, like, or they can make justifications, but it's always possible to do something better than, even if you're doing something good, it's always possible to be better.
Well, trying to be a better torturer today than you were yesterday is not necessarily a great goal.
I mean, morally better, not functionally better.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like if you're functionally better at crapping your pants, like yeah, you're not better. Are you're just going to have to clean yourself up more often. Like that's not some sort of discovery. You've not just discovered the cure to cancer. You've discovered the cure to you haven't discovered the cure to anything. You've just discovered how to crap your pants.
Do those people clean up after themselves?
They're called babies, so I don't know. Probably not. But
The one that
once you get to a certain age, it's not acceptable.
hopefully that's before 18, long before.
Yeah, I would hope that it's before 8. I'd hope it's before half of 8.
Some of these people today, I wonder.
I mean, to be fair though, like it's actually really interesting. There's a lot of ways in which babies and very old people are very similar. They share a lot of the same experiences, and they're also like if you think about it, also from like a spiritual perspective, they're also both the closest to like like beyond whatever we are.
Oh no, very much. Yeah, it's a reversal of the parent-child relationship towards the end, where the child ends up taking care of the parent at the end.
Yeah, or like the whole thing of what walks on four legs on is it one day or is it the beginning of the day in the morning, walks on two in the afternoon, and walks on three at night.
In the evening, yep. You're back to Oedipus again.
Full circle.
Yep. I don't know
So
if you knew that, but
yeah. Oedipus and the Sphinx.
yeah. So we can go on to the next slide. One of the things that Ptolemy II is most famous for is the Library of Alexander. And one of the aspects that people have overlooked there is how that could be used for a tool of societal and knowledge control. How, and especially when you hear stories about how they would seize whatever, scrolls came into the harbor and then return copies, keeping the original for themselves. Where it's a question of they're controlling what information everybody has out there. They have the real, true information, and the other people have the Ptolemy endorsed version. And that's an aspect of the library that I very much see was used at times that hasn't been explored much by scholars. What do you think there, or if you notice people exploring the idea of that being used as a societal control mechanism? Tag.
Sorry, one more time. The idea of what the library being used.
Yeah, that's used as a standardization synchronization tool
Oh,
as
you
part
mean
of the whole.
almost like the idea of like the creation of a canon?
Exactly.
I can
That
see.
the
I could definitely see that. Because you can't stop stories from being created, but if you can essentially standardize stories to be the best possible version for whatever you're seeking, then you can essentially accomplish more than choosing what gets published or what doesn't. You just make sure that the form that gets preserved, and because it's almost like a like a tune that if there's a bunch of like say there's two songs that are very similar in tune but they have different lyrics, if you're able to popularize and make known the one that best suits like your ideology or whatever, then you're guaranteeing that when people hear that song they're going to think of your message, not whatever the other message was.
Exactly. Yeah, no, and that's the it's the we're going to gather all the history together and put it together and then come out with one single coherent history, and that's going to be the official version. And it's basically a rewrite, restart, like we've been talking about.
Do I get a next slide?
Yeah, and with the library comes the well known creation of the Septuagint, which was the Greek translation of the Torah, which the first five books of of Moses. And in my hypothetical history, what actually happened was that the Septuagint was the official holy book for the synthetic Semitic religion, and it was a creation by both the Hellenistic scholars in Alexandria as well as the Nabateans, who had the knowledge of the ancient of the Semitic stories and the Canaanite stories. And what they did was they pretty much they gathered it together and then put it together to create the like I said, a synthetic Semitic religion that kind of captures all of the other ones into an archetypal form for the for going forward.
So why do you think that? What would your explanation for the use of monotheism be?
Well, that ties into it's basically it's putting Plato's philosophy into there. It's putting it's all based off of Platonism, and Platonism is monism, and that's where the monotheism comes in. It was a welding of a lot of the tend towards monotheism that it naturally tends to happen in religions. There tends to be a unitary as well as a duality form of most religions. That tends to be a tension in most of them. And what they're doing is they're combining that unitary aspect in the natural Canaanite and Semitic religions, and they're melding it with the Platonic Platonic ideas. That's where Philo comes into play, later on as well, where he's very much welding, Middle Platonism and the Jewish scriptures. Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting because you have a lot of elements like in the Tanakh that seem like out of place for what you'd expect given like like for instance, how do you explain the situation with Rachel and the Teraphim, or with Yehuda and Tamar, who dresses up as a Kadesha. Like, there's a bunch of things that seem to break the pretexts of the tradition. But if, like, what you're talking about, you're thinking of it in the syncretic context, it's almost like looking at the past and seeing how there was, like, polytheism, but then you still have this idea of like that it's something that was a part of the history, but it gets recontextualized as something that was like that people erred into, or similarly that like certain traditions, like the whole idea of like the Kadeshot, or the like the idea of the temple prostitutes, that was like, even though it's not seen as a good thing to do, you're not supposed to allow your daughters to become kadeshot. There's still this use of the motif to almost like maybe almost like as an onboarding for people who came from those cultures, where it's like, oh, like they see themselves within it, kind of almost as a similar way to how early Christianity appealed to non-Jews. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does, and that was definitely one of, especially more of the local undercurrent of it. The overarching one from above is that the idea that under Hellenism and Alexander is we're creating a brand new world and we're setting the rules for this world. And it's a we're bringing together the Greek ideas and all these other ideas, and we're going to blend them all together, and we're going to create something new and marvelous from it. And that's the idea of where it's the idea you're taking the Platonic ideas and you're using that as a framework on which to put to a framework skeleton on which to flesh it out with your Semitic traditions, if that's making sense.
Sorry, yeah, yeah, it makes sense.
And that's with the Septuagint. You have parts in there where it's almost scene for scene, cut and paste, just change the names from different pieces of Homer or other Greek works. And then you have other parts where it's clear you couldn't have done that anywhere except for in Hebrew, because you're using like a Hebrew acrostic where the first letter of each sentence forms a word, and that makes no sense if you're not doing it in Hebrew. So you have reason that it's like, well, that part clearly looks like it's Greek first. This part clearly looks like Hebrew first. And the way that that makes sense to me is if both of them were first, they had parts of it and they just kind of blended it together. And that was what makes sense if you're doing a syncretic, synthetic religion.
So, do you think that like the Elephantine Temple had anything to do with the creation of like what we now know as Judaism?
I think they were practicing a lot of the traditions that ended up being melded into it. I don't know if any of the actual priests or people there would have been involved with it. They might have been. I'm seeing it much more, like I said, I'm seeing Petra and the Nabateans as being one of the big players alongside, like I said, the Ptolemies in Alexandria.
So
I'm
then,
seeing
I was just going to say, who would have been responsible for the Septuagint, like the stuff that was originally in Greek? Would have it been uh, the Alexandrian Jews?
well, they wouldn't have been Jews yet. You didn't have Judaism. What you had was, and this is one of the ideas that I'm wrapping my head around, is a lot of what we think of as Jews. If we're talking about 300 BC, you almost need to use the name Carthaginians.
No, that doesn't make sense because Judaism existed after there were already Jews. I mean, like at the end of the day, like sure you could look at like the first time that the term Jew is used, but really what we're talking about is Judeans. They're ethnic Judeans.
Well, I'm talking about the Jewish religion. You had Judeans, but those weren't the people. Those weren't the Semitic people that I'm seeing in Alexandria. The Semitic peoples that I see in Alexandria, that say in the time of their descendants in Philo's time, identified as Jews and Jewish. I see them as being Carthaginians in 300 and 250 BC. The
But
vast majority of them.
what would make them Carthaginian unless they came from Carthage?
Well, because you had Carthaginian traders, you had Semitic traders throughout the entire Mediterranean world.
Yeah, but what I mean is Alexandria, like sure you had people who came there to trade, but there was also like Alexandria was the site of the largest Jewish population in the ancient Near East, like more than Jerusalem.
And I'm agreeing with you in 100 and 100 BC and 0 BC. And that's where the you did if you didn't have a Torah until 280 BC, you didn't have Jews, what we would think of as Jewish people in Alexandria before that point.
but
They weren't.
but that's only if you're thinking of Jewish as a religion. What I'm trying to say is that like
Well, how do you know that they're Semitic? How do you know which branch of Semitic origin they're from? Why are you being so reliant that they are coming from originally ethnic, over in the Canaanite areas, as opposed to simply being part of what I see as more likely the Phoenician, that the Mediterranean rim, the trading companies.
I mean, like, I'm not saying that it was only one, but I think that, like, to say that it was Carthaginian, do we have any reason to suspect that specifically, or is it just because they were all over the Mediterranean?
Well, what I'm saying is I don't see where the term Jew, as far as we understand it as Second Temple Judaism later on, that's not a term that I think is applicable prior to the Maccabean era.
It is. You only have to look to like the first time it occurs in the Bible, we know this based on context is what is it? Um, Mordechai, because he's described as Isha Mini Veisha Hudi. His tribe is put before his like nationality, but the thing is that essentially once you have Judeans in exile and the start of I mean, given you had diaspora before then, but it was more of an Israel.
That's what I had to rule that out as evidence, Ariel, is if it's in the Bible stating it, that's something that I'm seeing written after 300 BC. So I can't sit there and say that that's a basis for anything that happened before 300 BC.
Okay, but like what I'm trying to say is that, well, I mean, don't you
It's like
think?
trying to say that there were Americans in 1750.
But like what I mean, I see what you're saying, but in this case, it's talking about basically, um, I mean, these like you agree that like parts of the Bible were they were written in the Persian period, right?
They took Semitic traditions and previous written pieces and blended it together in 280 BC. There were parts of it that were clearly written before. I mean, they cribbed from the Song of the Aten, which was written, that was good, what, 1300 BC.
But I guess what I'm saying is based off of the geographic proximity, it seems just as likely that it would be a combination of Carthaginians and Judeans as much as like. I mean, I personally think it would be more likely that you'd have more like Judeans or Phoenicians like from Lebanon. It,
Here's what I question is, what did you really have going on in Jerusalem prior to the Maccabees? It's the so much of what we think of as the history of Jerusalem, we're basing it off of the Bible. And that's one of the things that I've seriously sat and thought about is, what do we really know? What can really say? We can say that Nebuchadnezzar II came by and roughed up the city. We don't have really any evidence outside the Bible. He came back a second time, sacked the city, and exiled people.
but again, like that's talking about a historic or rather a non-historical event versus something like where it's describing someone's nationality. You could say, oh well, it might have been from later, but like I still think it's important to look at the fact that it describes him as being a Benjaminite, but that he's like a Yehudi. And the thing is that that term Yehudi is the same word for Judean. It's also the same word for Jew. So like what I'm trying to say is that word didn't just come into existence when Judaism did. Judeans already existed and Judean exiles did as well. And so like what when I say that's what I mean when I say like the Alexandrian Jews. My understanding is that they were, descended from a Judean diaspora, or like I'd even be willing to accept Phoenician, but I just don't think it's very likely that because the Carthaginians tended to go west, from what I know, or like west and
And
north.
I think you're trying to read too rigid of a dividing line between Phoenician and Carthaginian.
Well, Carthage was a city. Phoenician was referring to the people, not the specific city.
Well, and that's where I was thinking of Phoenicia being the cities in the Levant there on the seacoast of the Levant. Byblos, Sidon, Tyre. Again, they usually throw in a couple more at times, but those three main ones.
It's a square rectangle situation. All Carthaginians were, well, I mean, I guess it depends on how you define it, because there were Carthaginians who, like, they were, native to the region, but they didn't emigrate from Phoenicia. But essentially, Carthaginians were Phoenicians, but Phoenicians aren't Carthaginians. Some Phoenicians are Carthaginian, but not all.
Right. And that's where it's the people are what they are. What they called themselves is something else. What we call them today is yet a third thing. And it's one of the things that didn't happen in Phoenicia that did happen in Carthage. It's Carthage actually did become an empire. They did have satellite tributary states and such. And they kept going strong after, Tyre and those kept getting harassed by the Assyrians and such. So they kind of fell off, after about, 700 or so. At the same time, you had the rise of Carthage. And it's, that's what I see it as, is Carthage sort of took a different approach, but I definitely see Carthage all over. It's well known that, they would have had, you know, a lot of presence in Alexandria because that's a natural stopover point in between Phoenicia and Carthage.
I mean, like, also the other thing is, so do you think that the Elephantine Temple and the community there was Carthaginian, or do you think it was Judean exiles, or like a diaspora?
Well, I guess I look at it not so much as a Judean diaspora as a Semitic diaspora. And that it's a question of these are all different Semitic peoples.
So then, how come all these things are like it's known as like the Jewish temple in Elephantine?
Because of the god they were worshiping there was Yao. And the Yao temples from that time period were it basically got retrofitted into being, what we know of as Jewish today.
But I guess what I'm saying is, it's not that that was made Jewish, but Judaism came from that. It's like I'm trying to think of how to describe it. I might have lost the train of thought, but um, like essentially that was Jewish, but it wasn't Judaism. In the same way that, like, I mean, like,
It's no different than trying to say, like, Marcionism isn't Christianity because there hasn't been, the Marcionites, they died off, a thousand years ago. They were basically, they followed a parallel similar tradition. And that's kind of how I see the various Semitic ones were. You had all these various parallel similar traditions. And what happened with during the Alexandria and the Ptolemies there is they took and they combined all those ones. It's similar to what happened with Christianity with the Council of Nicaea, where you kind of blended it all together and you created a synthetic version of all of them together, where it's not entirely true to any individual one, but it captures the essence of it, if that makes sense.
Interesting. It kind of reminds me. I was reading this yesterday because I was hanging out with some friends who were Christian, and I forget how I got to talking about it, but basically this idea that originally that the Christians they called themselves believers, but then there was like a bunch of different terms that got used. Like I think there's like Baptists, not like the modern Baptists, but you had Baptists, you have Christians, and it's like the Baptists referred to the ones who focused on baptism, the Christians referred to the ones who focused on anointing and stuff like that. But it's like to say that like they might have not like, and see that's the thing, the Baptists might have not called themselves Christians, but to say that wasn't part of Christianity would be kind of missing the point. It's like in the same way as that your ancestors who never met you might have if you believe that they're they're not watching over or whatever, then you could essentially believe that they have no idea of your existence and never will know, but that doesn't mean that they're not part of your story. It doesn't mean that they're not part of you.
No, I definitely agree. No, part of what I'm saying here is some of my struggles to wrap my head around readjusting what I think of as the past. Given, like I said, and I'm building off of, Jonathan Adler, and his research is pretty thorough, and he very much shows that there was no common practice of what we think of today as Judaism prior to the Maccabees Hasmoneans. And I was watching just a couple of days ago, another scholar who he's dating it to Simon in 140 BC as being this major point, which I had identified that 140 BC Simon one, but I haven't thoroughly investigated his to try to figure out what actually did happen there. But I agree, that was definitely a major changing point as well.
Do I go to the next slide?
Yeah,
All right.
and here we go to examine a lot of the rationale behind, the case behind why it would fit in there is, how it it fits into the whole Hellenistic, both, worldview and the whole schema of syncretizing and bringing together all the different cultures. And this would brings together all the Semitic ones as well as Egypt, and just really in the Greek cultures, very good for that Hellenistic restart. And
So
yeah,
this kind of makes me wonder, what's your take on like the tribes? Do you think that the names of the tribes were like created around this period as well?
I created, no, maybe a few of them. Finalized, yes. It's like the tribe of Dan. You already had a lot of references in other cultures to various the Danites, the Danoi, the Tuatha Dua Dan.
The
That
was it the Dananu? Was that they were called? By the Egyptians.
yeah. So that you had a tribe of Dan, and that's good 1,000 years before Alexander. So that tribe name was around.
Well,
They
what I mean is that they chose like the idea of there being 12 tribes in that they were called like this and this like what when do you think that list was actually finalized?
I think that was a Hellenistic thing. I think that whole emphasis on 12 and tying it together with the zodiac was very much a Hellenistic era because the whole solar zodiac was a development of right around that time period, where the precession of equinoxes and the ability to make the predictions that was becoming much better known among the people, and that was when they started emphasizing that. You had a lunar zodiac before that the Egyptians and Indians and others used for the longest time. But that was when that they really first started the 12 constellation solar zodiac as we know it was a little bit before you know Hellenistic times. Tag.
Uh, do I get an? Oh, yeah. So because yeah, like some of the things I was thinking, like you have some tribes, like you have the Banu Yamina, which might be where the Benjaminites come from. You have oh my god, I'm blanking. Issachar, which is like it shares a meaning. Like it's possible it was from Ish Sakar, which means like a man of hire, and that which is close to Ish Shekel or Shekelish or Ish Shekel, and then the Shekelesh or Shekelish were one of the sea peoples. You have like the theory that the Judeans or the Judeans came from like Idea or something in Crete. Like you have a bunch of different theories about this, but yeah, I mean like some of the tribes I do wonder because like if they might have had a geographical origin because like for instance in one part of the Bible it actually talks about the tribe of Gilad or Gilead, but Gilad or Gilead is a location, not a tribe, and so it kind of makes you wonder: did some tribes become places, and did some places become tribes, or like what's the connection between that?
Well, we're going a little off of this one, but that's very much where the whole table of nations kind of comes into play there. And it's the idea that you're playing with two different levels at the same time. You kind of have like an individual family genealogy, but you can think of it a little more loosely as the peoples. It's like when you're talking about that man, you can think of it about all those males that carry that similar Y chromosome. So you're dealing with a peoples, and that's where the different peoples descend and split up and battle and fight kind of thing. And that's one of the ways that I kind of see that they have the tables of nations and some of the mythology interpreted that way. Tag.
Interesting. Let's see. Next slide.
Yeah, and this is the idea of when you take what if you took Plato's ideas and you tried to apply it to the Canaanite ones and create it, how would you end up with it? And this breaks it down there, where it's the Torah and all that contract with God. It's part of the whole noble lie, and you're building you're building a mythology that they all need to accept and follow. It's the built-in leadership and authority hooked in there, and again, it's like the big one with Korah, and Korah being practical. Well, even if the whole thing's colored blue, do I need to add a couple of threads on the side that are also blue? And again, it's the idea of practicality is not what we follow. We follow tradition and the rules that our superiors tell us. And again, that's part of everything that Plato has that you want as your religion for your people to follow.
So I'm curious, what's your take on the oral law or like the oral Torah? So like so like the Talmud and Mishnah and stuff, or not Mishnah, sorry, Midrash. Like, do you think that like these, it's like, that this rabbi back then, so I forget how far back, let's see, when is the earliest story in the Talmud? uh, Late fourth or early fifth century. um, Wait, no, that's talking about the compilations, but I wonder, let's see, um, when was the Talmud first started? Between the third and eighth centuries. Is it I think it's saying BCE. I'm not sure though.
No, I think they're talking 80. They might that's when they first started, basically compiling it. I think they might be right that they didn't start compiling it until the third century AD, because I know for certain that the Christians had finalized their canon before the Jews finalized theirs.
Yeah, I'm not talking about when it was compiled. Like, I wonder, what's the oldest reference in the Talmud, like in terms of like, let me see if I can find.
Well, because part of the thing is you have so many of the Talmud stories that go back further as well.
Oh wait, let's see, dating. Okay, so
When
yeah.
did the judicial rulings start? Would be my question.
Well, no, no, like what I'm curious about. Here, I'm just going to ask ChatGPT. What is or which character in the Talmud goes back the furthest? Maybe which rabbinic character I should specify. Um, Shimon Hatzadik, Pirkei Avot. Okay, let's see. Uh, he's traditionally identified with either Simeon the First or Simeon the Second, either early third century BC or mid second century BC. Both of who were high priests during the Second Temple, long before the Mishnah and Talmudic eras. So I think it's just so yeah. Like it says, was it? Shimon Hatzadik was one of the last members of the Great Assembly, and that's in Pirkei Avot. So basically, so when did, yeah, I'm basically like what I'm trying to figure out is when is essentially the beginning of the Talmud, not necessarily when it started to be compiled, because a compilation isn't necessarily when the stories in it were written. But like, do you think that they go back that far? Or do you think that they were like written later in order to create lore and like basically, like, do you think they were real conversations that happened, or do you think that they were essentially like retrojected?
I think that some of the ones starting in the mid second century BC could be legitimate. I think a lot of it before that is retrojected. That's some of the, I come up with these hypotheses that it's like, this is kind of a wild theory. I wonder if it's right. And I look for evidence to show me that it's wrong. And that's the idea that a lot of the pseudepigrapha, a lot of the books, they were basically like spiritual fanfic, for lack of a better term. You know, it's basically it's the we're going to rewrite those events only using the Torah characters and this environment as our framework for it. Like somebody coming in and writing a new, Spider-Man story using the Spider-Man characters. Come in, write a Bible story using the Bible characters. Use that to fill in the gaps and such. And, doesn't mean that they can't be meaningful and worthwhile, but it kind of has a lot of that look to me. What do you think?
Sorry, one more time.
Oh, the idea that a lot of these stories were reworked, spiritual fanfic or something. Like a lot of Samson was a reworking the Hercules mythology into biblical Semitic framework and other sorts of things like that.
So, I mean, I could definitely see that for the first, but like, do you think that would also apply to like the stories from the Talmud or Midrash? Like, for instance, like those stories of like Honi the circle maker, or like a lot of the like mystical or kind of like the interesting stories that stick out more than just the rulings.
I don't discount the mystical stories, especially, mystical stories attributed to common people. It's when you're starting to have a bunch of them around, like Solomon or Moses or those characters that I'm a little more leery on.
But I guess my question is still, how do you know? Because like, if according to this, it was codified by with a certain agenda in mind, then wouldn't it be the case that like even those stories as well would be part of that same agenda?
Well, yeah, but what about the ancient world or anything in the past that's written down? Can't you say that about? It was written down by somebody with an agenda.
Well, no, but what I mean is that like you're talking about the common people versus like the like intelligentsia, and what I'm
No, well,
saying.
I'm saying when the character is one of the common people.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. I see what you mean.
Yeah, no, the mystical events that happen to the common people, I tend to be much more credulous towards that one. Whereas, like, those are much more believable to me than if it's Moses, turning his staff into a snake, that's one thing. But if it's somebody where this is a one-off kind of story and kind of thing, that's a little more believable to me.
Yeah.
Maybe that's my personal bias, but tag.
Uh, let's see. I think there's parts of the slide that you didn't necessarily cover. Like for instance, uh, so how do you think the Maccabees and Herodians played into it?
Well, the what I think happened is you ended up with the Jewish wars is a continuation of the Punic Wars, and it's still the same Semitic conflict versus Rome. It's just reframed over into a different territory. And the Hasmoneans, it was a basically it was the Carthaginian exiles, veterans of the Punic Wars, rebased in Tyre and then came down, and that's where between them and coming up from Nabatea, Edom down there, and between the two of them, basically, so, imposed the new Torah and the new faith onto the people of Canaan. And it was, similar to later on the, conquest by the sword. Come in here and we need to circumcise you and you will now become Jewish. Because according to the archaeology and everything else prior to that time period, you just didn't see the common people talking about the biblical characters, following any of the practices or festivals for the most part in the Bible or such. Tag.
Interesting. What about the like role of circumcision in Egyptian religion?
What about it?
Like,
I
do you
think
think?
I
Yeah.
no, I think that was definitely had a role to play. There's a whole lot more positive that I think the Jewish religion got from Egypt than what you would take away from reading the Bible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I was trying to unmute and it wouldn't unmute. But
Because you definitely have the Hyksos were 100% Semitic. They were basically Semitic conquerors. And that's one of the ideas of the parallels for the Exodus was the expulsion of the Hyksos was the Exodus. And but it becomes interesting that the 17th and 18th dynasty that followed there, they were very much almost Semitic in some of their practices. I want to say they brought in they worshipped a female goddess that was very much a parallel to Asherah. And they were very big on the whole brother sister marriage thing, like in the Bible and such. They started using the word Pharaoh. That started with Hatshepsut. She was the first person, first one there to use the word Pharaoh for the leader and the big house and everything. So,
really, I didn't know that.
yeah, yeah, which is why pretty much for me trying to date it before who the Pharaoh of the Exodus is before Hatshepsut. You run into problems because they weren't using the word yet. And it's very clear to me that the fact that they never list the name, they're intentionally not listing a single pharaoh because it's ending up being, again, like we said, a pastiche, a combo of a bunch of different pharaohs that ends up being, almost the archetypical, combatant for the incoming Semitic, it's a Semitic wilderness herdsman versus the civilized agriculture, you know, monument building Egyptians. Tag.
What I would push back on is like the idea that like of what was like the setting up a paradigm of like civilized versus like, because at the end of the day, I think that like it isn't that people are or aren't civilized; it's how they're civilized. It's what civilization, because at the end of the day. I think really, if you break it down, civilization even exists amongst non-human species of animals, and so like in a lot of ways the way that society colloquially uses the term civilized, what they really mean is sophistication, and that kind of carries with it all these what's the word, like all these like preconceived notions, I guess. And so it's kind of like it's like the difference between, you have hunter gatherer civilizations, you have herder civilizations, you have agricultural civilizations, but they're all civilizations. And it's not that,
Okay.
yeah.
No, it's interesting. I was using the words with a slightly different definitions.
Oh yeah, I wasn't necessarily even talking about you. It was more so it just gave me that thought, because
Yeah.
it is interesting, because you could also apply that to a bunch of different things. Like you could even apply that to technology, like the idea that was it like the idea that technology now means something that's digital, when technically, oh, I mean, even look at that, technically it's so embedded within our language, it has to do with function, something that creates a function that, I mean, I might be off with the definition technically,
Yeah,
but
no, I wasn't thinking of civil in the sense of sophisticated. I was thinking of it in a much more simply able to ha- have a larger per square mile per kilometer population, in the sense of you can pack the people in and they get together, they get along civilly. It's the idea of that they're following a set of civil rules whereby they can all get along together. Where if you're out in the woods, or you're much more in the you know herding or hunting sort of setup, that's not going to apply to you. You're not going to have the same rules. You're not going to be as civil in the sense of being able to get along in a large, high density, complex population. If that does that make sense of how I was trying to use it?
Yeah, but I guess even then, like, what does civil actually mean, or like what do people mean when they say it? Yeah, relating to ordinary citizens and their concern. So I mean, like in that context, it's uh, like um, uh, I mean, like, yeah, there's so many different contexts. Civil could mean non-military or religious. So I guess it all depends on context. But like the idea of civil as being like, like be civil, like really what people mean is be amicable.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
I was thinking of it as like a level of a hierarchy where you have tribal, and that usually runs to maybe between 50 and maybe 250 people for a tribe. And clan is usually a little smaller than that. There's usually maybe a dozen up to 50. But it's basically when you get much bigger than tribal level, you need some sort of higher level hierarchy. And that's where, to me, that's where the idea of civilization comes into play. Is how do you organize human beings to get along and functionally and not destructively at higher numbers than that.
I see what you mean. Do I go to the next slide?
Yeah,
All right. Let's see here.
this goes into the rest of like trying how to apply a lot of Plato's concepts to Judaism and how it correlates, and a lot of the ideas, the exclusivity truth claims, the the adding for social cohesion. This is all a recipe that Plato had laid out you know in the 300s BC, a good 100 years before Library of Alexandria and any of this was any sort of Septuagint was being written. And a lot of again, if you read through there, it's the idea that Plato had built in the making the synthetic religion resistant to outside change or outside debunking. And a lot of it is all very much belief based. And you have to be believed, follow the hierarchy, all things that we see not only in Judaism, but it's Christianity, Islam, and most most religions of any appreciable size that I've seen. Yeah. Any thoughts on these sorts of ones? You mute.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, it wasn't letting me unmute myself. Uh, so, like, do you think that there's something just inherent to religion, or I guess maybe not religion, but to what we think of as religion? Because, like, in a lot of ways, religion as a concept is very much like a Roman concept. So, like, insofar as saying that, and like the influence that Plato had on Rome, and like the connection of that, do you think that it's something that just as the result of how the Western world developed, that it kind of like maybe as a result of like later colonialism, this earlier idea that traces back to Plato got kind of imposed on the whole world, or do you think that it's something that, or like, I guess that's one of the ways to look at it. Do you think that it's something that like um, I, sorry, I'm tripping over my words. I guess do you think it's something that like was there from the beginning with just the way that people believe? Like for instance, how does this affect someone living in the middle of I'm trying to think the say like the middle of Papua New Guinea, who the first contact with other civilizations was made maybe like was it 50 or like no like 100 years ago or so. Like how does there like is do you think that there's something inherent to religion that like keeps people that way? or do you think that it's something that was like maybe not deliberately introduced, but was kind of like infected the rest of the world from the West?
Yes, I think that. Absolutely.
Which
Both.
one?
No, actually, both. You're right there. There was very much a Plato laid out a recipe there that got picked up by others and implemented. And, Plato wanted to implement it himself. So, that was no big secret there. He tried to do that in Syracuse. He was trying to advise, philosopher kings. He was trying to create his own. But
I don't know
I
why.
also, what's that?
I was just saying, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I feel like if people tried that today, it would just end up being some dumbass tech bro trying to rule his own little fiefdom and acting like he's so wiser than thou, but he just end up being. Actually, that sounds like our reality right now. Never mind.
I was going to sit there and say, have you been watching the latest, presidency operate?
Oh, this is a good comment. Plato is the most important man who ever lived, and most are completely unaware. Most people hear Plato and they think, oh, that's that stuff that you give to kids and they build stuff out of it.
Now, he was the original badass professional wrestler.
And then there's the other way that people know about Plato, which is the friend zone, Platonic. I thought that was a good joke, but
Although, I'm not sure how platonic he and Socrates necessarily were.
no, no, bro, they're just bros. Don't look too deep into.
Socrates was known to like his tender, innocent, susceptible to philosophy lads.
Yeah, I'll really knock your Socrates off. All right, so do I go? Oh wait, so what are your thoughts on like the idea? What does it
No,
come
no,
to?
that's what you're asking. And part of the thing is, one of the things that I've resolved is I tend to work with definitions and try to figure out, how it works that way. I see spiritualism as the relationship between the individual and the divine, and religion as the relationship between a group and the divine. And that's where the conflict comes in, is a religion has group needs and it will sacrifice an individual in order to achieve that group need. So as a result of that, you end up with religion leading people toward God. It definitely has like a ring around God and it leads you there. But once you get to that ring, it says no further. You can't actually get to God. Because if they let you get to God, then the religion becomes meaningless and the priests lose their power. And that shit is not going to work for the religion. So,
Interesting.
and
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say, so how do you think that virtue and moral order plays into this? Because, like, there's a lot of things where you could say, oh, that makes sense for, the relative morality that was, held at the time it was written or when it was supposed to take place. But, like, then you have a lot of things that, like, we look at this today, we're like, yeah, this is messed up. We shouldn't follow what it says in this. But the thing is, you have people who they still believe that, essentially you need to live and die by this book. And, like, that's not to say it doesn't have value. It's not to say that it doesn't have like it doesn't. It's not to say it doesn't have divinity, but like when people kind of going to what you were saying about like being invulnerable to questioning or whatever, like like at the end of the day, I'm because the thing is that what happens when religions reform to the point that that and again, it's not the religion itself, but there's people within the religion that they essentially reform to the point that they reject certain precepts that people that'd be considered more religious hold to, but like it's almost like rejecting the interpretation without rejecting the belief, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, a lot of that I resolve with the idea of, the idea of the word of God. That's what's written on paper versus what's written in man's hearts. And what's in your heart, it's not in words. It's beyond what's words. On paper, that becomes a legalism, and you need to try to figure out a to resolve the two. Resolve the legalism between the two, and you don't want to be too legalistic, you know, because if you go too legalistic, you lose the spirit.
Definitely, definitely. So, let's see, next slide. Or wait, so one thing I was wondering, so the whole idea of exclusive truth, that's definitely something that I've experienced when talking with, people who take things like completely literally. And it's, I mean, do you think that this is something that like didn't exist prior to the creation of like what we see as like the monotheistic traditions, or like I guess maybe like the mainstreaming of some of Plato's ideas within religion? Like for context, do you think that like it was the norm for people to believe that like Helios was literally the sun, but like also doing all these things like anthropomorphically, or do you think they kind of understood that there was like some poetic freedom with it?
Oh, I think they definitely did not take it that there was a anthropomorphic figure that corresponded inherently to that one. It was much more of the sun being the god itself kind of concept. And you write the anthropomorphic stories, sort of like the idea of people writing about Uncle Sam and such. Everybody knows Uncle Sam versus Lady Britannia or whoever you want to do. Those sorts of archetypes for the countries. Same sort of concept, I think, going on. Tag.
Interesting. Okay, let's go to the next slide.
And this is the idea that what happened was Ptolemy and the Nabateans, they were going to use this as it's the idea of using it as a psychological, you know, angle and weapon. And that's very much what Ptolemy sorts of philosophical warfare I say here, where where Ptolemy's trying to take more of an information technology approach to controlling things, and this is much more reminiscent of, again, the traders, the Nabateans, how again, it's the control by the priests. It's very apparent that there was a network amongst the priests that coordinated things amongst, in between the various kingdoms and such as well throughout the past. And this is just, kind of some of the history here going on here. Thoughts?
Sorry, I was muted. Not particularly.
Okay.
Um,
And what ended up happening is once you started in the 270s, and this is right after you have right, it's the same time you're having the Septuagint being written. You have Ptolemy being involved in the Syrian wars with the Antiochus and the Seleucid Empire, and you also had Rome and Carthage going at each other to the west of him. And he was kind of, sort of playing both ends against the middle a lot of times. And this goes over a lot of the, again, the history during that time period.
but yeah. playing both sides against each other. How could that possibly go wrong?
Yeah, but you usually make a lot of money before it goes wrong eventually. And you try to make sure you end up getting out of town and leaving other people holding the bag, or not holding the corpse in the case of, some of what Ptolemy did with with the successors of Alexander. Him hijacking the body was one of his big moves. And the other one was the rise of Hannibal. Hannibal was Hannibal's one of my favorite characters from the ancient world. He was just all he did was just he won at whatever he was trying to do, more or less, until he got sold out by other people.
Onyx Rock asked, "Did they hide Alexander's body?"
No, that what happened with Alexander's body with the Ptolemies is Alexander was being transported in this giant deluxe, you know, cart cataphracts. I forget exactly what the term is for it. It was basically a mausoleum on wheels being hauled by like 20 horses. And Ptolemy intercepted it up in the Syria area as it was being taken to Macedonia, and he took it to Egypt, and he ended up again with Ptolemy too. They built a special tomb for it in Alexandria, and they ended up putting it on display in Alexandria, and it was a place of cult worship up until the Christian persecutions
Like,
and the Diocletian. I want to say that was in like the 390s. And at that point in time, you no longer had any reference to the body of Alexander. It vanishes from the historical record. And I have some theories as to what happened to it after that. But again, for another show.
interesting. So the reason that they hijacked it was because they wanted people to go to Alexandria and not to Macedonia in order to go worship him.
Well, and basically, he was a god to people at that point in time. His body was an object of worship. They had mummified it in the ancient Egyptian sense.
Yeah,
Again, they
it's like, dude, get in the car. We're stealing a god.
exactly, and that's why they wanted it. And what the Ptolemies did is they established a cult for the Ptolemies that directly, drafted on Alexander, where it was in the same building, and the other Ptolemies were always buried in there, and it became, they were trying to say it's the cult of Alexander's, and we're following him, so we can't kind of count as well.
It's actually hilarious. That's such a pick me moment. It's like, look at me, I'm here too, I'm here too, I'm cool. Pay attention to me.
Yeah, eventually, I see that tying into the cult of Alexander ended up one becoming one of the threads that became Christianity later. So,
How do you mean?
well, couple of different ways. One of them, it depends on what you're dealing with the idea of Christianity and all that one. And I take Christ as the idea of the archetype of kenosis, self-sacrifice. And that was part of Alexander was one of those leaders who very much led from the front. He was he was taking as many arrows than his men. He got you know plenty of times he should have died, caught behind enemy walls, and his people burst through the walls in order to pull him out with arrows sticking through his body and still survived.
Talk about plot armor.
Very much so, yeah. Up until he get poisoned, but so where was I going with that?
Oh, right. Second verse, same as the first, Punic style.
Yeah, it's the again, much more of the timeline where you're talking about the in between the between the first Punic War and the second Punic War, and we're sort of counting down the timeline leading up until the time of the Hasmoneans. But this is the various political and military things going on in between Rome and Carthage and Egypt and the Seleucid Empire. And you have, it's very much a Game of Thrones sort of thing going on. You already had that going on in the East with the Diadochi, the successors of Alexander, but you also had Carthage and Rome in there, and it was almost like they were duking it out to see, these were the semifinals, the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference, semifinals to go into the finals afterwards.
I just realized duking it out, you're essentially fighting over territory like dukes. Is that where it comes from?
Very well could. I don't know.
Let's see. Duking it out origin. Most
Because
like, let's see. Duke was used as a euphemism for fork, which in turn was slang for hand or fist. Never mind.
yeah, I was trying to get there through the rules, but that's the Marquis, the Queensberry. It's not a Duke, so I can't get there from that way.
Wait, get where?
Oh, get to boxing with from Marquis to Duke.
Oh, I see what you mean. All right, do I go to the next slide?
Yeah, yeah. No, here I'm pretty much I trace a lot more of the history, and both on the Roman side and in the Eastern theater and Western theater, and it's the again Hannibal is particularly interesting because much like Pyrrhus before, who was in both the Eastern and Western side, Hannibal ended up switching from the Western theater to the Eastern theater later in his career, because everybody knows that he took the elephants over the Alps, and for almost 20 years just ran ramshackle through Italy. The only reason he lost was Rome realized that they couldn't beat Hannibal. What they could do was they could sail their own army over to Africa, and they could basically lay siege to Carthage. And that's what they did. Is Carthage basically recalled Hannibal because they were under attack there, not because Hannibal was losing. And he went back, and basically Carthage ended up losing the war, and they sued for peace. Had this outrageous, fine of silver that they were having to pay, and Hannibal ended up taking over the political reins of the city. He did a bunch of political reforms, financial reforms, and he paid off the silver in 5 years rather than the 10 they were allotted. At that point in time, Rome wanted Hannibal out of there, so they demanded him. So he ended up going to the Seleucid Empire, and there he came up with one of my favorite inventions, where the Seleucids made him an admiral. They put him out to sea, and he came up with one of my favorite inventions in the ancient world, which was the snake bomb. They caught a bunch of poisonous snakes, and they put them into ceramic pots, and they launched those from one ship to another, and basically won the sea battle as all the sailors were trying to fight the snakes.
That's hilarious.
Oh, that's absolutely one of the wonder. It's like, talk about your genius moves.
So, I forget what I was going. So, what do you think would have happened if he wasn't recalled, or if he didn't listen to orders and still marched on Rome? You think they would have won?
No, no. The problem was it was much like Carthage was in a situation that was similar to like Germany in World War II, where they just didn't have the manpower or resource base to to outlast them in the war. That the biggest problem is Carthage was going from a mercantile standpoint. They didn't. Hannibal was the rare exception of a Carthaginian that was actually in the field. For the most part, Carthaginians hired other people to fight their wars for them.
Interesting.
And it runs into problems when you don't pay the mercenaries and they decide to sack your city instead. That's recurring theme throughout history.
Mm-hmm. Next slide.
Yeah. Yeah, here we're dealing with the rise of the Roman Republic in the West, and how Rome basically starts to take over the East because the East was very fragmented. You had some of the Greek city states, then you had the disintegrating Seleucid Empire, you had Egypt that was the Ptolemies were running, and they were the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. So that was Ptolemies were pretty solid there, but Rome was sort of conquering their way around the Fertile Crescent and the Levant.
And North Africa.
Well, Carthage, yeah. I was talking after the fall of Carthage.
Oh,
They pretty
okay.
much, yeah, they hadn't conquered Greece yet. Rome moving through Greece and Asia Minor and into the Seleucid Empire and all that. That was over the next century or so.
Okay. Do I get the next one?
Yeah,
One moment.
yeah. This one we're dealing with. This should be the time period between the Second and Third Punic Wars, and here you're dealing with the various. I break down the different aspects as to you know the Game of Thrones maneuvers. What's Rome doing? What's Egypt doing? What's the Seleucids doing? What are the Nabateans doing? It's just sort of charting out the various different players and how the pieces are moving across the playing field. The Nabateans are one that I think and their trading network is, I think, vastly under recognized because they had a presence in all of the various different areas. They were basically, I always saw the Nabateans as like the Phoenicians of the desert. They had the overland trade routes, and the Phoenicians had the overseas routes. Next one, if you're ready.
Do they work together?
Oh, I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did, and that was one of the ones where they would usually marry into a lot of the ruling families. Marry daughters into and such, and a lot of times is you ended up with during this time period, as like the Seleucid Empire was collapsing and such, the people who were left running things were often related to the trader, the Semitic traders, the Nabateans and all. They may have been again, that's one of the things that a lot of people haven't really looked at, is the way the women fit into things, where in Judaism, it's if your mother was Jewish, you're considered Jewish. And a lot of times, if you married in your daughter in there, you ended up with a Jewish ruler that a lot of people didn't even realize was Jewish. I think some of those Roman emperors were actually Jewish and people didn't realize it. Hey,
Yeah, that reminds me. Um, was it? Um, it reminds me. Last night I was listening to some stuff. It was like about ancestry or whatever, and it was like sponsored by Ancestry, the DNA site or whatever. But they had a bunch of different celebrities on, and they had Alanis Morissette on, and she didn't even know, but her mom was Jewish, and so according to Jewish tradition, that makes her Jewish, or just generally, if you look at it like ethnically, half Jewish. But like it's just wild that there's people who literally didn't even know. So do you like how common do you think it was for people who are like Semitic in the Roman Empire to try to pass as, or like maybe more specifically Carthaginian or Jewish to pass as not that?
I don't even know if it's a matter of passing. I just, that's one of those things where I'm trying to wrestle with it. Is I just don't know. I still don't know what exactly that offensive Judaizing was in that back in the first century AD that was so bad that people were killed for it.
So is your theory that that's essentially like that before it was just a mishmash of like different Semitic tribes or groups that then like there was a movement to try and unify it and that was seen as a threat to the Roman Empire?
Well, what I see as the threat to the Roman Empire was the exclusionary aspect of it. It was basically we're opting out of the empire, and that was the big objection. It wasn't that they weren't giving an offering to the current emperor. They were supposed to be giving an offering to the past, the basically the archetype of the emperor, the past emperors, is pretty much a tax to the state. It's basically saying, I support the state, I support the government. And you're talking about, you're letting these people saying, well, I don't support the government, I do something else. And to allow that exception can be a threat.
But the
Do you
question
see what
is,
I'm saying?
yeah, but how much of that was actually the case versus how much of it was that they rejected the worship of the emperors, and so because of that, they were seen as not being loyal citizens, and purely on that basis, was it actually that they rejected the Roman Empire, or that they rejected the divinity of the Roman Empire?
I think it's that Judaism, the way that they wrote the laws was to exempt them from a lot of stuff that was convenient to be exempted from.
Like what?
Like certain taxes. Again, that donation to the emperor, that's a kind of tax. And you're saying that you get out of that tax. You get your holy days. There are certain, you know, be,
Dude, I because the thing is with the holy days that actually you probably end up spending more money than if it was just a regular day, and it's like it's a lot of work. So I don't think that that's not like it's not like it it's not the it's not the the European or Christian idea of a holiday like oh you get off work and you or maybe that's more American but you get off work and you celebrate like yeah you do celebrate but you get off work in order to do other work.
but what I'm saying is it's that you're out of sync with the rest of society. And that being out of sync with the rest of society is kind of an inherent problem.
But they weren't the only ones, so why specify the idea of Judaizing as opposed to the act of like rejecting the empire or something like that?
Well, one thing is, even back then, they controlled a significant amount of the money.
Who did?
The Jewish people.
Where in Alexandria?
pretty much in the whole empire. They were very much the merchants. It's like Philo's brother was one of the richest men in the entire Roman Empire. He was the Abelard or whatever of Alexandria. He was in charge of accumulating all the money for Rome in Egypt. He was their chief tax collector.
So then, if there was such an issue, why would they make, you know, like a group that was seen as subversive? Why would they give them control of the money?
Well, I don't think it's a question they gave him control of the money. I think they had control of the money. Rome conquered these territories. You're talking, these were the people who were in place beforehand.
Wait, in which territories though?
Pretty much all of them.
But so that's what. But so what I'm saying is, at this point, do you have Judaism yet, or is it just still a different, like Nabateans, Phoenicians, Carthaginians, Judeans? I forget what else. Um, like, like, because what I'm saying is, look, like,
The time period I'm talking about here on the screen, up to about, in the 180s BC, you're still dealing with you're not dealing with what we would think of as Judaism yet. You're still dealing with much more of that independent groups. This is like the beginning of the initial efforts to try to syncretize and bring together.
so then
They
once you
have. Go
so
ahead.
So I mean, like by that own logic, what I mean, I maybe disagree, but like just playing devil's advocate based off of what you were saying before, wouldn't that mean that like Philo or his brother that they weren't Jews, they were just Semites or Semitic speaking people?
They were, because the transition point, I'm comfortable saying 140 BC is when you definitely had Jews running around Judea, rule it, ruling and worshiping and sacrificing in the temple, talking about Moses and following the Passover and all that stuff. About 30 years after the time period we're talking about right now.
Wait, so also, and the thing with the finances, that was mainly because there was a centralized temple, unlike the other parts of the empire, right?
No, no. The reason they had the money was because they had established merchant networks dating back thousands of years. These
But
the,
but the
this is
that
they just took over the Phoenician. It's just renamed Phoenicians, Carthaginian traders. Just because the government fell didn't mean that the people who were unloading the ships and selling the product changed. They just, the people in charge changed, and who they were, the top people getting their cut changed. It went to Rome instead of Carthage. Other than that, nothing pretty much changed.
all
Tag.
right. We're at the next slide.
Okay. Yeah, no, this is where I'm seeing Judaism start to come in. It's about 180, which is when you had the Maccabees. And it is very convenient that it's picking up right about at the end of the Third Punic War, and it just seems to be continuation of those efforts over into here. And it very much seems to be that what happened is you had the combination idea of taking the synthetic religion, you had lost Carthage, and you were basically going to take this new religion and institute it and have a new Semitic kingdom in Canaan. And that's very much what I see as part of what was happening as the plan. and it was a push up from the Nabateans and Edom, and the idea of the Ptolemies working against the Seleucids as well. I got a cat to feed. Hold on a second. Tag. You can talk and fill in. What
No
do you
worries.
think?
It's interesting. Honestly, it's a lot to take in. Um, so in the meantime, let me see what I can. Yeah, in the meantime, let me find. Just let me know when you're back. In the meantime, I'm trying to find. Pretty sure I put it. Oh yeah, here.
Okay, I'm back. Yeah, no. Cat wanted food. Now, the idea here is the Maccabees, like I said, is it seems to be a continuation of the of Carthage. It seems to be like the veterans of the Punic Wars that you know they're now going to take over and have their own Semitic kingdom in Canaan.
See, wait. So you think the Maccabees were veterans of the Punic War?
Yeah,
Is there
yeah.
evidence?
I think I think that's where they got so many enough trained soldiers in order to retake the country.
So, like, I think that's a really cool idea. I'm just wondering, is there evidence of that, or is that more your speculation?
Oh, that's more my speculation. It's trying to find actual raw data during this time period is tough
Yeah.
because you have obviously the book of Maccabees, the various books of Maccabees, but trying to find references to these characters like in the Seleucid Empire records or in Egyptian records, it's almost non-existent.
Yeah, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack that's already been searched through and thrown out.
And if you're accepting what's written in Maccabees as the 100% truth, it's, well, that's what you're doing, but I don't know how you can make that leap comfortably.
All right, well, if you're doing that, I've got a bridge to sell you in, I don't know, somewhere that doesn't have bridges.
I was going to make a bad joke about Adam's Bridge in Sri Lanka, but yeah, I couldn't get there.
Well, somebody did. Somebody got there.
Yeah, no, I still like the idea that that was actually a human-made bridge. That's a nice concept, and it
So
may
what's
be.
so what's the implication that Sri Lanka was the Garden of Eden?
No, no, that would be would show some evidence for the Ramayana because
No,
that was
you said Adam's bridge,
yeah.
as in Adam from the Bible.
Well, that's what they named it. It was they named it Adam's Bridge, the going from India to Sri Lanka.
But the story it's connected to was the monkey army, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's honestly kind of a shame to call it Adam's Bridge. It's like it's Christian imperialism imposing itself,
I know it should be like Ramsbridge.
or the Monkey Bridge.
And again, that's one of my interpretations. I actually see the monkeys as the Homo sapiens, and the other ones as the again you're dealing with my Homo divinus stuff, the previous existing superior technology people, and the monkey ones that those were the humans that they needed the help from.
Do I go to the next?
Yeah,
Okay.
and it seems like again that 140 BC that there's this transition from Maccabee to Hasmonean, and that's with I think it was Simon who takes over then, and it's one of those. I don't know how much of the history of the Maccabees. That seems almost like the mythical, kings of Rome, the first seven kings of Rome, and all.
Or the Knights
Where,
of the Round Table.
yeah, it's every one of them except Simon all of a sudden seemed to vanish from the scene right before 40 BC, and then Simon takes over, and then starts writing the records, and everything becomes official. And like I said, it's one of those where I'm trying to put together what I can of the histories and trying to, read between the tea leaves, so to speak. Based off of some of the larger political concerns and how it makes sense, given the like I said, the work of Barney and Gamerkin and Adler. Yeah. What do you know about Simon?
Like Simon the Maccabee, or like Simon. Yeah.
Yeah, the one that took over in 40. Yeah, the Maccabee.
Honestly, not a whole lot.
Okay,
Not because of the lack of evidence. I mean, there might be, but I don't know a lot about him in general.
right. No, no. Like I said, there was a new scholar that I had never encountered before that he was talking a lot about him and about how that was the big transition point. And it's like, yeah, I'm identifying the same character and all there. It was, yeah, Thyman Thassi. It was after Jonathan's death. Yeah, right in there. And yeah,
Is Jonathan the one who was crushed by the war elephant?
I don't know. It might have been. I forget which one of that was. That was after he went for the dinner. He got suckered into a peace treaty dinner, and then they killed him afterwards. Was that the one, or was that a different one?
Oh no, he was killed in battle. He went like he stabbed and killed a war elephant, but it collapsed on top of him.
Oh, okay. No, that was a different one then. Okay.
Maybe I think that might have been Eliezer. I'm not sure. I'm rusty on it. But anyway, I went to the next slide.
Okay. Yeah. Like I said, I just keep tracing the time period, and trying to figure out just how it works there. And they're rolling pretty much just like the Hasmoneans roll like pretty much a standard Semitic kingdom. You're at this point you're well into the era of what I would consider Second Temple Judaism. Part of it is I really would be curious what was on the Temple Mount at this point, because I don't know if we have a good record of that one. The first thing that I think we have a good record of is Herod's temple, don't we?
I'm not sure. I haven't looked into the evidence of it. like of the different ones?
Yeah, I've tried to look for evidence for something before Herod's Temple, and you got the basis for stuff, but nobody has any descriptions of what they were worshiping in before Herod's Temple. You hear how awesome Herod's Temple was, but you don't hear anything like that.
Yeah, it
You
would
know,
be.
this
Unfortunately, there's not a lot of surviving records from like Lebanon, like during the ancient times. But it would be cool if there was like a reference like that showed that there was material sent down to southern Canaan for the building of a temple to Yah or something. But unfortunately, like there might have been, but we can't know that there was. So it's total speculation.
well, right now I consider a first temple under Solomon in Jerusalem questionable
Well,
at best.
under Solomon, but we do have evidence of a Jebusite worship of a goddess in Jerusalem.
Oh yeah, no, no. What I'm saying is that that whole great temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, that they got them destroyed. It's easier to sit there and go with there wasn't one to get destroyed in the first place. There was something else, maybe something, but not necessarily.
It got
I do
destroyed.
think I do think that they did build a temple in the Persian era in Jerusalem. I'm pretty comfortable with that one. How big it was and what form it took is another story.
Let's see. Do we cover everything in here? I think maybe at the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff probably as much or better than I do. It's just, I'm lit. I went through and I listed the relevant events there, and a lot of it has the Nabatean role, which I don't think is as much because they were very much involved with that. And when sitting back and if I look, kind of zoom back a little bit on the Bible, the whole role of the Edomites is kind of interesting, where they're kind of they're not totally like the Judeans, but they're kind of pretty good people, and we don't want to be too mean to them. We want to treat them okay.
Wait, who again? The Nabateans, you're saying?
Yeah, the Edomites. Yeah,
Yeah. And then you have the whole like the kinship story of Esau and Jacob.
yeah, and and the relationship with Tyr and Hiram of Tyr, and you know, it's very those seem to be the players involved with a lot of the it seems that's consistent with my idea that those were a lot of the people involved with the Ptolemies with the writings.
Interesting. All right. So let's see. Fall of the kingdom of Judea.
Yeah, here we're dealing with the when Pompey starts, this is how Rome's been working its way around, and we're now down here, and again, as so much, it's the happens. The Semitic kingdoms, they're destroyed so much from within, from inter palace, inter family. It's just stabbing each other in the back over who's going to rule, and you end up getting taken over from the outside, which is pretty much what happened here.
Okay, and then Herod. Oh yeah, Antigonus and Herod. That's a wild story.
Go ahead and tell that one.
I'm rusty on it, but basically that the Maccabees ended up forcibly converting a lot of the people in their territory to Judaism, and that was responsible for was it was Antigonus was Herod's father, right?
No, Antigonus. No, Antigonus was the Seleucid emperor.
Whom no, who am I thinking of then? Herod's father was
I know who you mean. Let me check here. I know who you mean. Let me check.
Agrippa? No, Antipater. That's what I thought before, but it was like Antipater is the Pater. Like that just seems too on the nose. But
Yep, and a Potter.
Antipater the Idumean. So yeah, a bunch of people were forcibly converted, and then basically, when people are forcibly converted, they tend to become very zealous, and sometimes not in the good way. And, like for instance, you had Tomas de Torquemada, who he came from a converso family, and he was responsible for uh, like carrying out the Spanish Inquisition. Um, you had I'm trying to think what else. I mean,
Well,
just
Antipater, he wasn't converted, was he?
yeah, he was.
Okay, because I knew Herod. That was one of the big
No, no,
things that I.
no, no. His ancestors were forcibly converted. Sorry.
Yeah, Antipater, his ancestors were, but he wasn't himself. I was going to say Herod was actually Jewish in all real senses of the word, wasn't he?
Yeah,
And that's what I didn't. I've never understood why he was rejected as not being Jewish back in the day, because technically his mother was Jewish, his father. You know what I'm saying? I never understood that big objection to him for back in the day.
I think the main rejection of him is for his behavior. It's not saying that he wasn't Jewish, but that he didn't like that he was essentially a heretic. I might be wrong.
I understand what you're saying, but I also
Oh
get
no, no, no!
Herod's point
No,
as
I
how
remember.
much of a heretic am I if I'm giving you this great temple here? If I'm
Okay,
giving you this great port,
I remember the reason. It's because he was seen as a Roman collaborator.
Well, yeah, he was. Okay.
So he was seen like a traitor, not necessarily that he wasn't seen as Jewish, but
Okay.
for a lot of groups, if you're seen as a traitor, that's almost worse than being seen as not a part of them.
No, no, I definitely get that. Yeah, no, you can have an excuse for somebody who didn't know any better, who wasn't part of it, but you were part of it and you betrayed it. No, that yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I do think that he probably gets a worse rap than he actually deserves, but at the same time, based off of what we know of him, if it's true, holy crap, the man was insane.
I have little doubt that the saying of better to be Herod's pig than Herod's son is probably was a very true statement.
Wait, better to be his what?
His pig than his son.
Why? He'd eat his pig.
No, he wouldn't because kosher.
Oh, true. Sorry, I didn't think about that. But he wouldn't
No,
have a
that was actually an insult. That was a comment somebody one of the Romans made about Herod. Better to be his pig than his son.
Oh, that's good. But yeah, anything else about Herod? Like, how do you think he plays into this?
Well, one is in a lot of ways you could almost see Herod as a Jewish messiah. He was kind of a conquering hero, and I'm sure to some people they considered him a messiah back in the day with the way he restored the Judea.
At least within the context of like the you know again, who knows when the ideas or like the precepts for what a Messiah was, were established, but basically that he didn't have the lineage from David, which would disqualify him, at least according to the standards that we have now.
Right, right, but I don't think Cyrus did either. So
Well, true, but no, there's this idea of there's the idea of Mashiach, but then like the idea of like difference between a Mashiach versus the Mashiach. There's this idea of like the Goel, the Redeemer, like the one who will lead the people out of exile and who will like establish a righteous kingdom. like that's what I'm talking about. Like that's connected to the prophecy of the like son of David.
Gotcha. Sort of like the difference between a devil and the devil.
Yeah, or like Antichrist versus the Antichrist.
And interestingly, Herod and his father, they gathered the reputation for being particularly fair people. Herod's father, that's one of the reasons Herod got the position, was because his father was known for fairness. Same thing happened with Vespasian. You know, Vespasian was known as the good tax collector. He was fair.
Interesting. Anything else?
No, not in here.
All right. Well, this was absolutely fascinating. I'm glad that we did this.
Yeah, no, I am too. So, what do you think about the idea of that Judaism was a new creation, and again, the time of Jesus was about as old as like Mormonism is today, which is tough for me to wrap my head around still.
I mean, I definitely think that parts of it, but like for instance, we already have evidence of like even before this, we had evidence of a Passover tradition that like dates like there's a lot of element. So no, I guess what yeah, I don't really functionally disagree. It's
Yeah, no, it's and it explains a lot of the things that I had trouble explaining with other sorts of theories, because it explains the various different voices and traditions that get threaded together, because you're dealing with a bunch of different time periods. And we'll do another one there because it's like Sargon. You take Moses is one part Sargon, one part Hammurabi. You're different characters. David has a part of Sargon too. Sargon was a cupbearer, just like David was,
so
who ended up taking over the kingdom.
I'm curious, how do you think this whole theory plays into the creation of Christianity, given that it basically seems like there wouldn't have been that much difference in time between the establishment of Judaism and Christianity?
One of the things I'm seeing is that,
Sorry. Yeah, yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
no problem. Again, if you watch my 2-part presentation that I gave for Miguel for his Finding Hermes group, it plays into it that I'm seeing in the sense of Vespasian was Jewish. I think it's Henry Davis was the researcher, but he very much, showed legitimate reason to think that Vespasian was a descendant of Herod the Great, and that would make more sense that he was, high level royalty as opposed to just a commoner that somehow took over the Roman Empire. And it fits together well with a lot of things, and it makes the sense of the whole sack of Jerusalem and all was almost a Jewish civil war, which makes sense when you realize that Titus had both Philo's nephew as his basically aide de camp, his first in charge under him, and his mistress at the time was Berenike, who was again another one of Herod's, I think, granddaughters or great granddaughters. So again, the Jewish connections with Vespasian, and he very much played into it, and you see a lot of the. Not the first one to notice the connections between the Flavians and the early Christianity.
Interesting. And that also kind of recontextualizes the whole idea of like, was it Shimon Bar Yochai being smuggled out of Jerusalem during the siege and telling Vespasian that that he was the emperor, and then what was it? Vespasian says, like I forget exactly what he said, but something like you're lying and that's treason or something, and then or to suggest that I'm the emperor when the emperor is someone else, and then they find out that the emperor's dead, and then Vespasian gets named emperor.
And again, how much of Jewish history is based off of Josephus and and just a handful of writers there, and it's almost like that's what happened. Is Vespasian and Josephus went back to Rome and they wrote up the history of the Jewish people. Now that it's they've lost the temple and all, and there were stories about Vespasian doing the miracles like healing the blind, helping the blind see and stuff, and
So, how would you explain all these new ideas and traditions that would have been foreign to all these people get introduced and accepted? It seems like there would be some sort of like remembrance of some group rejecting it.
in what sense are you talking about? Because part of Vespasian taking over as emperor, it would allow him to tap into what we were talking about earlier with that cult of Alexander, which is part of what Julius Caesar brought back to Rome. And, he was Vespasian was the Pontifex Maximus. That was a title that every emperor had from Augustus forward.
Yeah, but right now I'm talking about Judaism. Sorry, I went back to talking about Judaism.
Oh, okay. Recontextualize for me. Ask again.
So like how would you explain like that that all these different populations that shared a bunch of different backgrounds, that they all essentially unify into one group by this period, over however long of a time, but it seems like there would at least be some remembrance or some memory of people, like of a group who were part of like this whatever, but then they didn't adopt it. Or I guess you could also argue that maybe because of the strength of like the theory that was used to create this ideology, it basically made it more resilient than other traditions, which could explain. I mean, like on one hand, you could argue that the reason that they survived is because there wasn't the extreme persecution that um, but even that's no. I don't think that's a good. Basically, that like because the Roman Empire eventually stamped out paganism, and then so did Islam. That essentially that it made it easier for monotheistic religions to exist. But even then, there was persecution against other types of monotheism. So it's like I don't think that's necessarily a good argument. But like I guess the question is why wouldn't there be even one group that was part of this conglomeration, or one of the groups of people who later converted to Judaism, that has this memory of their brothers or their cousins all converting and like to this new religion. Like it seems like there would be some record or some memory, even if it was just a cultural one.
You got two angles going on here. One of them is something that Plato had talked about, and that it takes two generations to erase the past. Once you get to the second generation, once you get past the second generation, they have no way of knowing what happened 3 generations ago. And that's how that's you combine that with a inner secret tradition, initiatory group that keeps the secret amongst themselves as to what the real truth is.
See, that's the thing that just seems the strangest to me. Like if this whole theory is true, I just, at least in my like, and again maybe this is just my misperception, but like the people who are like at the quote unquote top in terms of like knowledge or study, they're the ones who at least who seem to be the most devoted to it, not who know the truth that it's like that a construct or whatever. Like it like like I
They're
mean,
the most publicly devoted to it.
but like, but at that point, if you know the truth, why even keep up appearances? What's the point?
Yeah, power, control. I don't know.
I mean, but the thing you have to keep in mind is that, like, unlike, and I mean, sure, yeah, there's a bit of overlap, but I feel like in like the Islamic and Christianized worlds, there's maybe more overlap with the institutional powers and like the religious institutions.
What we're talking about here is it's what you talked about earlier with the oral Torah, and it's the idea of that secret oral tradition that parallels the exoteric. And it's the, those are the ones that's not spoken of, and those, it goes back further. Islam, again, Islam was very much with like Arabic, and Arabic was formalized with it with Islam, and it was a verbal, a non-written tradition that ended up becoming written down. And to me, that's the biggest reason why Judaism survived, is because they're the people of the book. It's because they had the book that they could refer back to. And it's essentially, again, it's spelling. It's the old school magic. It's spell. They've written down there. Nobody can argue with what those words say. You can argue what they mean, but you can't argue what they say. Hey,
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, so like, what are like some, I guess, like, what do you think are the weaker points in your theory that like you could shore up or whatever? Like, like playing devil's advocate, because I'm always trying to look at it that way. Like basically, we've heard this the whole hypothesis, but what, like, I guess, what do you think are the weaker points, and what do you think are the stronger points that like point to your hypothesis being potentially true?
well, one of the weaker points is always when you're speculating a successful conspiracy that buried, the fact that it was successful. It's you're basically that's a tough thing to verify at that point. It's to me what I think would go along there is I haven't explored closely a lot of the Book of Maccabees and a lot of the timeline of the conquering. And I know some people who have dated a lot of the military records to versus Roman sort, identifying Roman military techniques and things like that were implemented in there. And if I'm right, you should be able to see, a lot of specific, more Carthaginian sort of sensibility, weapon techniques, kinds of things happening in there. If I'm right on that one. And like I said, the rationality for the control is the idea of Plato's Republic. You're trying to institute a religion to control the people. And the idea is that the leaders would know the truth, but the public wouldn't. They would just think that this ancient mystical religion's true.
But I
Okay.
guess, but like, especially like after reformations, and like when you have a, what's the point of keeping, like, again, assuming it's true, what's the point in keeping up the illusion if the illusion's broken?
Did you ever see The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance?
I've never even heard of that.
Oh, it's a classic movie. And it's the idea of this newspaper reporter, and he comes to town and he wants to know who shot Liberty Valance, who was this awful, awful guy. And they're trying, he goes through all this research, and, they have this is one guy who they proclaim him as the hero for having shot Liberty Valance. And he kind of sheepishly and reluctantly takes credit for it. And then again, anyway, I'm giving a spoiler, but at this point in time, it's old enough movie, people should have seen it. So at
Hey,
the
but
end,
hey, wait. But some people didn't even hear about it, so maybe don't give away the spoiler.
Well, I gotta give away the spoiler to get to understand the point. He
All right,
gets
fair.
to the end and he finds out that it wasn't the hero who shot Liberty Valance. It was this rancher that everybody hates and can't stand. And what the rancher asked to him is, you know, are you going to print the truth or are you going to print the legend? You,
Interesting.
and to me that's what it is, people don't necessarily want the truth. They want a nice story that makes them feel good. And for the most part, they're much happier with a nice story that makes them feel good than a truth that makes them uncomfortable.
But yeah.
Dear Lord, I speak the truth enough that I recognize that.
Anyway, we've been going for like 3 hours, but we're definitely going to get into streaming again more because I've been honestly bored out of my mind, and it's always great to talk with Graham and to talk about new stuff. I'm actually going to start doing. I'm probably not going to live stream it just so I can like edit it and add some cool overlay, and also be StreamYard sucks, so I need to use was it Premiere Pro or whatever. But I'm going to probably start recording. I also got permission for it. Otherwise, I'd feel a bit weird about it. But I got permission from Chris Bennett to basically record. It's not going to be an audiobook because I'm going to read his stuff. And then, actually, so here's the tricky thing. Maybe what I'll do is I'll probably just, yeah, because I don't really register a lot of stuff when I read it. I'll read it, do the recording, basically get the video ready, and then watch it in a stream and react in real time to it. That's the best of both worlds. Anyway, other thing I wanted to share. I don't think I shared it much before. I mean, I might have with Graham, but I got this Darbuka a few months ago because I joined this one musical ensemble, Layali El Sham. I really enjoy it. But yeah, what was it? And then also Zero said, noble lies, creating cohesion through deception, claim of divine origin of the Edic structure. One second. Accident. Sorry, one second. Where was it? And then false certainty, prefer to have continually having to continually reevaluate your reality choices. Anyway, on that note, is there anything else you wanted to say, Graham?
No, totally agree there. Too many people, they would prefer a certain falsehood than they would a truthful uncertainty.
So, anyway, on that note, until next time, I'm going to play this out. And on that note, until next time. Wait, hold on. Gotta time that better. Until one second. Until next time.